Hello everybody, welcome back. This is Wait, Why Can't I Leave? By JazzTazz. Chapter 46. Interesting to say the least. Izuku was nervous. Today was the day he would be taking the entrance exam for his dream school. Not only that, but he was also taking the recommendation exam, having had Aizawa recommend him. And while Aizawa hadn't mentioned anything about it being important he passed, Izuku felt like he had to pass the exam, or he'd be ruining Aizawa's reputation. Granted, the only reputation he has is among heroes and UA students, but still. That wasn't even touching on the anxiety Izuku was getting just thinking about how disappointed Aizawa might be if he failed. Overall, Izuku was not mentally ready for the exam whatsoever. There was only one thing he could do to prepare. Chat name, the pros and cons. Blurr, sent an image. Anxiety, aren't you worried? Me, what about? Anxiety, I don't know. Me, oh my god, you're right. Cockatoo, what's wrong? Blurr, midbrain, not a cop. Adding it to the list. Blurr, not the time for that! Coffee, what happened? Blurr, my brain is being rude. Make it stop. Coffee, what are you worried about? Blurr, letting someone down because of the entrance exams happening soon. Coffee, why? You know there are so many ways to get into the UA hero course. Blurr, yeah, but brain. Coffee, look, if whoever you're talking about is disappointed in you for not getting in on the first try, then maybe you should stop caring about their opinion. Obviously, they don't realize how difficult the heroic exam is, especially depending on your quirks, since unfortunately, the HPSC pushes the entrance exams to be focused on physical quirks. Do your best. If said person has any logic in them, then they wouldn't be disappointed if you somehow didn't get in first go. Although you're a pain in the ass, I know you'll get in. Blurr, thanks. Izuku arrived at the exam early. Since Aizawa was a teacher at UA, he had to be there to help judge the practical portion, likely the quirkless sparring. Remember, kid, do your best, but don't stress. I'm sure you'll get in. It's not the end of the world if you don't. You still have the normal entrance exam and the sports festival if needed, though I highly doubt you'll need them, Aizawa told him, warming Izuku's heart. Over the last couple of weeks, Izuku's found out how much of a softie Aizawa is. I will, Aizawa. See you after the exam. Izuku could tell Aizawa was hiding a smile behind his capture weapon. See you later, kid. With that, Aizawa left. Izuku looked around, not really knowing what to do. He didn't know anyone, though he hadn't expected to. Most here would be related to a hero or have families who invest both time and money into the HPSC. So he decided to go lean against the wall and wait until the exam started. Maybe annoy some villains or try to figure out the other people's quirks. Before Izuku could decide, two people started walking up to him. One with long black hair who seemed to be dragging over the other. He had half red, half white hair, perfectly split down the middle. Hello, my name is Momo Yaoyorozu, and this is Shota Todoroki. Who might you be? Yaoyorozu asked, slightly confusing Izuku. He was not expecting anyone to walk up to him. Oh, I'm Izuku Midoriya. Izuku stuttered a bit at the end, though he wasn't all too upset at it. It was a huge improvement from how he was months ago. Who recommended you for the exam, Midoriya? Izuku saw in the corner of his eye two others walking over towards him. I'm not sure if you know him, but Eraserhead did. How about you guys? Ah, well, my cousin is Fat Gum, Yaoyorozu explained. She looked over at Todoroki expectantly. What about you? Izuku asked, not looking at Todoroki. My father is Endeavor, Todoroki said, voice devoid of emotion. That was concerning. He would have to look into that later. Izuku internally groaned. He was turning into Tsukauchi. Finally, one of the two examinees who had been walking up to them spoke. You're Endeavor's kid? Now that the attention was off Izuku, he could properly look at the two examinees. The one who had spoken was tall and honestly too loud. The other one had a wavy green hair, though it was darker than Izuku's. Yes, why? Todoroki turned towards the loud one, with what seemed like a blank stare, though if Izuku looked a bit closer, he could tell Todoroki was uncomfortable. He definitely had to look more new endeavor. I don't mean to be rude, but your father is an asshole, the loud one said bluntly. I hope you're not like him. I refuse to be like my father. Izuku saw as the anger started breaking through Todoroki's blank expression. I'd hope so. He truly is an awful man. The loud one then turned to the rest of the group. I'm Inasha Yuarashi. You can call me Inasa. I'm Momo Yaoyorozu, and this is Izuku Midoriya. Izuku has now decided Yaoyorozu is his favorite person. And I'm Setsuno Tokage. They all started talking. Izuku half listened in. Inasa mentioned how his parents had told him someone had anonymously recommended him, while Tokage was recommended by her cousin Deadshot. Izuku saw a short kid with purple balls for hair? Something to do with his quirk for sure. He was looking creepily at some of the other examinees. Izuku was building up the courage to go over there and have a conversation with him when what looked to be Aizawa's scarf shot out of the vent. It quickly wrapped around the purple pervert before pulling him into the vent the scarf had came out of. Izuku coughed to cover his laughter. Quickly using his quirk, Izuku looked through the cameras, and sure enough, Aizawa had a quirk-infused glare aiming right at the purple pervert. Serves him right, Izuku thought to himself, and based on the sun crying, Aizawa has likely banned him from UA. Thank God, there was no chance of having to deal with him if Izuku got into UA. He might have broken some laws, but so far, he hasn't technically murdered anyone, and he'd like to keep it that way. For now, at least. Probably wouldn't be all that great to break that law while in a hero school. Am I a mouse, a dog, a bear? More importantly, I'm the principal of UA. The door Izuku has been occasionally looking at had opened wide to reveal Nedzu. Izuku was both excited and terrified, mainly because he did not want Nedzu to know he was Blurr. Thank you all for coming here today. When you go through that door, Nedzu gestured to the door to their left, you will be instructed to wear quirk-suppressing bracelets to prevent cheating on your written exam with quirks. If you are caught trying to cheat, you will be immediately banned from UA. After you finish your written exam, a staff member will take the quirk-suppressing bracelet and you will be instructed to go to the locker rooms to change into a gym-type uniform before coming back here to wait for the physical portion. Good luck to all, Nedzu finished, smiling a little too wide. Izuku was now pretty thankful he had actually liked learning instead of relying on his quirk. It was interesting not being able to use his quirk. He hadn't really noticed it before, but he had a constant static type noise in his mind. That only came back once the quirk-canceling bracelet was off. From what Izuku could tell, he was one of the first to complete the written exam. He saw some empty seats as he left the room, though he was the only one in the locker rooms. Entering the waiting room again, he saw Yaoyorozu and Inasa talking. Izuku walked over to them, though didn't join their conversation, intent on just listening. It didn't take long for Todoroki and Tokage to join them, being followed by what seemed like the majority of the examinees. Tokage joined Yaoyorozu and Inasa's conversation, while Todoroki just listened in like Izuku. Izuku was looking around, trying to figure out all of the visible quirks, when suddenly someone tapped his arm, seemingly trying to get his attention. Izuku turned around to look at whoever decided he was someone they wanted to talk to. The person had neat blonde hair with blue eyes. He looked familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. I'm Nato Monoma. Monoma introduced himself. It clicked. The Monomas were one of the families that funded the HPSC. They also designed and distributed most of the hero merch, which earned them an insane amount of money. While yes, the hero themselves got part of the money earned, only about 20% actually went to the hero. The other 80% was split between the HPSC and the Monoma family. I'm Izuku Midoriya. Izuku almost forgot that when somebody introduced themselves, that it was pretty important that he also introduced himself. Before Monoma could continue talking, Nedzu entered the room, explaining what would happen for the physical exam. They'd each be assigned a random letter for which group they would be in for the obstacle course. Afterwards, they'd get another short break before being randomly assigned a partner for quirkless sparring, which they'd once again be wearing the quirk-canceling bracelets for. After all that, they'd each be interviewed by Nedzu. If Izuku was being honest, the interview with Nedzu was what he was most worried about, partly due to him being Blurr. The other part, though, was his record. Aldera blamed him for literally everything they could, especially to keep their star students' records clean. He couldn't think of that right now. He had an exam to complete. Chapter 47. Oh, fuck. Izuku learned he would be a part of the last group to run the obstacle course, and while he could have done some stretches to prepare for it, Izuku decided to watch the other groups do it through the cameras. Figuring out how to traverse the obstacle course the quickest will be probably more helpful than overstretching. He could probably get some quick stretches in during the second last group's race anyways. Izuku didn't really recognize anyone in the first group. He was trying to figure out which examinee was related to what hero and how well they used their quirk. One of the examinees seemed to have really poor control, or at least poor planning. His quirk seemed to create lasers out of his belly button, but instead of waiting for a wall to launch himself up or for a stretch of obstacle free running, he just used his quirk, which only pushed him into all the obstacles. That must hurt. Then Izuku moved his attention to an examinee with yellow hair with a black lightning streak in it. Might be related to the pro hero offline, especially since he looked to have an electric quirk. It was cool to see his quirk in use. The examinee was sending out small bits of electricity at the other examinee's feet to slow them down. The electric examinee got first place in the race, with the laser examinee getting last. Unfortunate. But maybe this would help that laser examinee learn that he needs to plan out his quirk rather than just using it. The second group included Monoma. Izuku was really excited to see what his quirk was, as the Monoma family had kept their quirks as secret as one can, and Izuku didn't really have much of a reason to look through the quirk registry for it. As soon as they were told to go, Monoma disappeared. Wait, no, that's not right. Izuku looked around. No one was looking at him. He disappeared into the internet. Yep, he was right. Monoma was in the internet. Are you able to copy quirks? Izuku asked, getting Monoma's attention. It was the only explanation for Monoma now entering the internet like Izuku did. Yes. Now, please tell me how to get out of this. There was clear panic on Monoma's face. To be fair, being on the internet for the first time was pretty scary. Well, the best way to describe it is to imagine where you were before using the quirk, Izuku tried explaining. He'd been using the quirk for so long, it was second nature, the teleporting aspect anyway. Getting over firewalls still took a while. One moment, Monoma was there. The next moment, he was gone. Looking at the cameras showed Monoma was back on the obstacle course, now using the laser examinee's quirk. Though much better because he was stopping it before he hit obstacles. Izuku checked the cameras for the waiting room he was in. No one was looking where he was before helping Monoma, so he teleported back. Sure, the cameras could see it, and there was a chance someone noticed him disappear only to reappear, but hopefully they wouldn't think too hard on it. He wanted to keep the teleporting aspect of his quirk a secret for as long as he could, or at least until he got those support items from Hatsume. Just teleporting into the internet wasn't always useful in a fight. It helped with dodging, but if the villain caught on and Izuku was just teleporting back to the same spot he was, he could be taken down pretty quickly. Looking back through the cameras, Izuku watched as Monoma overtook first place. Izuku mentally let out a sigh of relief. He would have felt really bad if Monoma had gotten last place, all because he'd copied Izuku's quirk without knowing how it worked. The next group to go looked like it was missing a student. Izuku looked closer. No, they weren't missing a student. Now actually looking, he saw a floating outfit. The examinee must have an invisibility quirk. Though Izuku was unsure how useful it would be, both Todoroki and Inasa were in the group. Immediately, Izuku saw two things happen. Inasa lifted himself off the ground, some kind of wind quirk, while Todoroki froze the other examinee's feet to the floor. Inasa had obviously dodged this, being in the sky and all. Surprisingly, so did the invisible examinee. Seemed as though Todoroki didn't notice them. By the time other examinees freed themselves from the ice, Todoroki, Inasa, and the invisible examinee were all across the line. Izuku didn't pay much attention to the next group, mainly focusing on stretching right. It'd be really bad luck if he didn't stretch right. He saw that Tsukauchi was in the group. Her quirk was really interesting, allowing her to split her body into different segments, still being controlled by her. She sent out a couple of fingers, which crossed the finish line first. Finally, it was Izuku's turn to go. He had a good idea on what each obstacle was, and what the quickest way to get past them were. He looked at who else were in his group. Yajirozu was the only one there he knew. Looking past her, Izuku noticed one examinee whose head looked like a bird's head. Maybe related to Hawks, or at least Hawks was the most likely to have recommended him. Izuku looked back to the course in front of him. The first obstacle was a maze, obviously trying to get all the examinees lost. It then led into a short open field. They would then climb up a wall, only to have to run back down, which, trying to dodge all the bumps and holes in the ground, Izuku had specifically analyzed this part, knowing exactly where to run to avoid it all. Finally, they would have to parkour across the concrete pillars in the water. As soon as they were told to go, Izuku ran. He was able to use the cameras to know where the path was. From what he could tell, he was the first one out, though he wasn't paying much attention to the others. There wasn't much Izuku could do to run faster. Yajirozu passed him on a bike, something Izuku had not been expecting. Yajirozu obviously reached the wall first, though she had paused. Looking closer, Izuku could see a grappling hook being made from her arm, some kind of creation quirk. Izuku reached the wall soon after, though he only slowed down. As soon as his boots made contact with the wall, he was back to running. He is very thankful Hatsume had made him these boots. He isn't sure what he would have done if he didn't have them. Izuku only slowed down slightly when he reached the top. Once he was sure the boots were connected to the proper floor again, he got to the downward run. One of his favorite aspects of his quirk was being able to put internet files over his vision, allowing him to completely dodge all the bumps and holes. Behind him, he could hear some of the people falling over, who he felt bad for, but ultimately couldn't do anything for. Even if they followed him, they'd have to step in the exact spaces he did to follow the path right. Finally, Izuku was nearing the end. A few weeks ago, he would have dreaded the parkour before the finish line, but after running Aizawa's course straight out of hell, he was honestly relieved water was his only worry. Izuku shuddered at the thought of those damn electrified floors. There was a moment where Izuku almost slipped and fell in, but he had quickly regained his balance. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief when he was announced first place. 13 directed him to the next waiting room, which was really just the sparring room they'd be using anyway. Once everyone from his group finished the obstacle course, they were explained the rules for the spar. As already said, it would be quirkless, and they'd be wearing the quirk-canceling bracelets again. The goal was to either push their opponent out of the bounds or to pin them to the ground for 5 seconds. They should avoid unnecessary hits. They would be randomly assigned into pairs. Izuku looked for his name. He'd be versing Kaminari, though he wasn't really sure which of the other examinees they were. Luckily, Izuku wouldn't have to wait long, as he was one of the first to spar. Turns out, it was the examinee with the electric quirk. They didn't even have time to talk before Cementos told them to start. Izuku immediately rushed towards Kaminari, having it built into him to try and catch his opponent by surprise. So far, he hasn't been able to do so with Aizawa. But luck must have been on his side today, as he tackled Kaminari to the floor. Kaminari had a look of shock on his face, obviously not expecting Izuku to tackle him. It was kind of cute. Izuku thought was cut off as Kaminari pushed him off. Both quickly got back on their feet. Izuku once again rushed towards Kaminari. They were sparring for a couple of minutes before Izuku was finally able to push Kaminari out of the ring. Wow, man, you're really good, Kaminari spoke as Izuku held him up. Oh, thanks. Izuku had not been expecting Kaminari to talk to him, let alone compliment him. You seem really cool. Can I have your number? Kaminari paused. You can say no. I don't want to make you feel like you have to. Sure, Izuku interrupted. Kaminari sent Izuku a small smile. Thanks, dude. They both exchanged numbers before going to the final waiting room. It didn't take long for Izuku to be called into the room for his interview. Hello, Izuku Midoriya. Nedzu started, staring at Izuku as though he was looking in his soul. Or would you prefer Blurr? Oh, fuck. Chapter 48. Finally, some clarity. Nedzu hadn't expected Aizawa to recommend anyone for UA, though it made sense, as who he recommended was not his foster child. Nedzu also knew Blurr's identity. Aizawa did not. Cackling was heard throughout the building when Nedzu found out Aizawa had unintentionally recommended Blurr to UA. Though that did not mean that Nedzu could meet Blurr earlier than he thought he would have. He knew he would be meeting Blurr at some point, given that he passed at least the general recommendation exam, as Blurr was planning on going to UA. Though it would have been more stressful for Blurr if Nedzu had randomly called him into his office after getting into UA. This way, Nedzu would be able to talk to Blurr with less of the stress. It would still be stressful on Blurr's part as he was being interviewed for the UA recommendation exam, though unless Blurr wasn't fit to be a hero or someone else was far more fit, Nedzu already planned to accept Blurr through said exam. The irony of Aizawa recommending his foster child only to technically be the reason Blurr got into UA was something Nedzu could not pass up. It was finally time for the interview. Nedzu specifically planned for Blurr's quirkless spars to be one of the first. Blurr walked into the room looking nervous, likely due to this being the interview that may not allow him into his dream school, though Nedzu also suspected that Blurr was also anxious over whether or not he knew. Hello, Izuku Midoriya. Might as well stop Blurr from guessing whether or not he knew. Or would you prefer Blurr? Oh, fuck, Izuku said, without even thinking. Shit, no. Then Nedzu started cackling. Izuku had many regrets, and this was now one of them. He was going to move into the internet itself. I apologize. I haven't expected such a reaction. Nedzu had finally stopped cackling. How long have you known who I was? Did Nedzu only find out once Aizawa started fostering him, or had Nedzu known before that? Or even did he only find out after Izuku was recommended for UA? Practically since the beginning. Nedzu took a sip of his tea. It took a moment to realize why I hadn't been able to track your location until after you had logged off. I must say, that teleportation aspect of your quirk is quite interesting. Izuku had no idea how to respond. Really. How are you meant to respond when one of, if not the smartest being existence, is the one who knows about your hacker self, and is also the one who decides whether or not you go to your dream school? Okay, but how did you find out? Izuku finally settled on saying. As I said, I tracked down your location after you had logged off. Though I could have checked the tenant list of that apartment, I chose not to. If only for the challenge. A few weeks later, your quirk status has been changed, which aligned with the theory of how you got into the chat. Nedzu explained, answering Izuku's initial question, now though giving him a new one. How did you know it was my quirk? The police, while of course haven't checked the quirk database at the beginning, thought he was just a hacker. Oh, that was simple. I added a feature into the chat that meant that I had a say in who left the chat, so when you tried to leave or get kicked out, I denied it. The security of the chat is slightly lower than UA itself since you hacked into UA, but couldn't hack your way out of the chat. The logical conclusion was a quirk at play instead. Nedzu took another sip of his tea. Would you like some tea? Sure? Izuku liked tea, though he hadn't expected to be offered any. Soon enough, there was a cup in front of Izuku. What are the limits of your quirk? Your file only mentions the access to the internet via your mind, and we both know your quirk does so much more than that. Nedzu asked. For example, do you know if you could teleport others into the internet with you? Izuku thought for a moment. He hadn't when that villain attacked him practically a year ago, though he hadn't been trying to bring the villain in with him. I'm not entirely sure. Would you be willing to test it out right now? I'm very interested in knowing. Nedzu was already standing up. What about the interview? Izuku wasn't opposed to exploring his quirk, though he would want to make sure his interview actually happened. Izuku wasn't opposed to exploring his quirk, though he would have to make sure his interview actually happened. He'd hate to miss out on UA because he was meant to ask about the interview, rather than immediately accept testing out his quirk. You don't need the interview, as I already know you from the chat, as the interview itself is to ensure only those who have true heroic intent enter through the recommendation exam, Nedzu explained. Although you have done a few less than legal things, you haven't done anything with malicious intent. I had already planned to accept you into UA as long as you passed the written exam. Really? I would have thought the illegal quirk use might be a problem. At this point, Izuku figured he could be himself, being easier to do so since he had already talked with Nedzu already because of the chat. If you had used your quirk for evil, then it would have. But as far as I'm aware, you've only used it for chaos, which if I had such a quirk, I would do as well. A smile broke out on Nedzu's face, though Izuku no longer felt fear seeing it. Now, let's talk more about your quirk. Specifically testing if you can take me into the internet. Nedzu lifted a hand, paw, towards Izuku. And so Izuku took it. This time, when teleporting into the internet, he tried to focus on bringing Nedzu with him. He closed his eyes before teleporting in. Opening his eyes showed that Izuku was alone in the internet. Unfortunate. Though he had half expected it, so he quickly teleported back out of the internet. Ah, that's unfortunate. Though, maybe with more practice, you could eventually bring others, Nedzu said, as Izuku turned to look at him. Nedzu only looked slightly disappointed, though Izuku knew it wasn't at him, rather the quirk not allowing him to teleport others into the internet. At least, not yet. How do firewalls work with your quirk? Well, for me, they're just literal walls. The higher the security, the higher the wall. Izuku thought back to Yui's firewall. The firewall for UA had been the biggest one I've come across. How did you get over it? Nedzu had moved back to his seat, making another cup of tea in the process. Well, all things of the internet become physical for me, so I just created a bunch of sticky notes and climbed up them. Because with a quirk like Izuku's, it truly was that easy. Nedzu had burst out in laughter at that. Though, luckily, I only have to do it once, since my quirk does the equivalent of saving a password for the firewall, even when the security is updated. That would be quite helpful, and would explain how you stayed in UA's system even after I updated the security. Nedzu paused, seemingly deep in thought. Izuku wasn't sure whether or not he should be terrified. Finally, Nedzu spoke again. How would you feel if I allowed you to control the Zero Pointers in this year's regular entrance exam? A chaotic smile spread across both Izuku and Nedzu's faces. And that's it. That's all there is. Okay, so this took me 3 days to do, because I would make it to the end of a chapter and then I would get off. I could not finish the story for the life of me, or the chapters for the life of me. But yeah. I've got 2 bloopers. This might become a normal thing, I don't know, but I mess up like 1,000 times each video, so you know. Here you go. As he started, staring at Izuku as though he was looking into his soul. Are they doing sparklers outside? Bro! Izuku asked. No, Nedzu asked. Why would Izuku be asking about his own quirk? Anyways, that was it, so I hope you enjoyed. Bye.